Why does walking away from an avoidant feel less like ending a relationship and more like tearing away a part of your own identity? This is not your typical breakup pain. This is something deeper, something that reaches into the core of who you believe yourself to be. The struggle to leave is not really about them at all. It is about the invisible mechanism inside you that keeps whispering, just a little longer, just a little more effort, and everything will change. Here is what most people miss. The bond keeping you attached is not built from their love or commitment. It is constructed entirely from your own relentless investment in who they could become. You are not holding on to a person. You are holding on to potential, onto hope, onto the fantasy that your sacrifice will eventually be rewarded with the connection you have been fighting for all along. And every day you stay, you are not just staying with them. You are actively choosing to believe that your worth depends on making this impossible dynamic finally work. Today, you will learn the 3 psychological stages required to sever this bond completely, ensuring that when you walk away, you take your self-worth with you fully intact. In fact, you will take more than you came with, because the process of leaving an avoidant, when done correctly, is not an act of loss. It is an act of profound self-reclamation. If you are exhausted from the cycle of giving more than you receive, if you are ready to stop sacrificing your peace for someone else's comfort with distance, stay with me. This is your roadmap to a clean internal break that does not just preserve your self-worth, but actually amplifies it. Let me start by explaining what this bond actually is, because until you understand its true nature, you cannot effectively break it. The connection you have with an avoidant operates fundamentally differently from other relationships. Traditional bonds are built on consistent availability, mutual investment, and reciprocal care. Those bonds feel stable because both people are working to maintain the connection. But the bond with an avoidant is built on something else entirely. It is built on inconsistency. It thrives on the unpredictable pattern of closeness followed by distance, warmth followed by coldness, engagement followed by withdrawal. Your nervous system interprets this inconsistency as a threat. When someone is reliably available, your emotional system registers safety and the bond stabilizes into a calm, secure attachment. But when someone is unpredictably available, close one moment and gone the next, your system goes into overdrive. It perceives a gap that must be closed, a threat that must be managed, a problem that must be solved. This triggers an intense, almost compulsive drive to pursue, to fix, to reconnect. The bond becomes addictive not because it feels good, but because it feels urgent. Your entire emotional system becomes organized around the goal of getting them to stay close, to finally commit, to stop pulling away. What you are experiencing is not love in the traditional sense. It is your nervous system trying desperately to regulate itself by controlling their behavior. The avoidant has become your external regulator. When they are close, you feel calm. When they distance, you feel panic. And that panic drives the chase, which temporarily brings them closer, which temporarily calms you, which then triggers their need for distance, which then triggers your panic again. This is the cycle. This is the bond. And it has absolutely nothing to do with whether you are worthy of love. Understanding this is the foundation of everything that follows. You are not weak for struggling to leave. You are not foolish for staying too long. You are caught in a psychological pattern that operates below the level of conscious choice. Your nervous system believes that if you can just get them to stay, you will finally feel safe. But that safety will never come from them. It can only come from you learning to regulate your own emotional state, independent of their presence or absence. So how do you break this bond without shattering your sense of self in the process? The answer lies in 3 distinct stages, each one building on the last, each one moving you closer to genuine freedom. The first stage is what I call the recognition of the true cost. This is where most people get stuck because they are looking at the wrong metrics. They count the months or years invested. They tally up the good moments and weigh them against the bad. They try to do a cost-benefit analysis as if this were a business decision. But the real cost of staying in an avoidant dynamic is not measured in time. It is measured in the opportunities for authentic connection and personal growth that you sacrificed while you were busy chasing someone who was running away. The avoidant dynamic creates what I call emotional stasis. Your life feels frozen in place, perpetually paused, waiting for their next move. You cannot fully commit to your own goals because you are always holding space for them to finally show up. You cannot open yourself to other relationships because you are still hoping this one will transform into what you need. You cannot move forward because you are stuck in an endless loop of hope and disappointment, investment and withdrawal, giving and receiving nothing sustainable in return. This stasis is the real cost. It is the version of your life you are not living because you are too busy trying to earn love from someone who has made it clear through their consistent pattern of behavior that they are not capable of giving you what you need. Notice, I did not say they do not want to give you what you need. I said they are not capable. This is a crucial distinction. Your worth is not on trial here. Their capacity is the limiting factor, and no amount of your effort, your understanding, your patience, or your sacrifice will change that fundamental reality. To truly recognize the cost, you need to get brutally honest with yourself. I want you to think about the mental and emotional energy you have spent on this person. Count the hours you have spent analyzing their behavior, trying to decode their mixed signals, wondering what you did wrong, figuring out how to approach them without triggering their withdrawal. Think about the conversations you have had with friends where you dissected every text message, every interaction, every small shift in their behavior. Think about the nights you could not sleep because you were replaying arguments or imagining scenarios where they finally understood you. Now imagine all of that energy, all of those hours, all of that intense focus and analytical power directed somewhere else. Imagine it poured into your career, your health, your creative projects, your friendships with people who actually show up for you consistently. Imagine the life you could be building if you were not spending your resources trying to solve the unsolvable puzzle of making an avoidant person commit. That is the true cost. Not the time you spent with them, but the life you did not build because you were too depleted, too distracted, too emotionally exhausted to invest in yourself. Here is a practical tool that makes this recognition visceral and undeniable. Create what I call a reciprocity ledger. This can be mental or you can actually write it down, but the act of documenting is powerful. On one side, list every effort you have made in this relationship, every text you initiated, every plan you suggested, every emotional need you set aside to accommodate their discomfort, every time you stayed calm when you wanted to express hurt, every compromise you made, every conversation you navigated carefully to avoid triggering their withdrawal, every moment you showed up even when they did not. On the other side, list their efforts, the times they initiated connection without you prompting them, the emotional support they offered without you having to ask, the compromises they made to meet your needs, the times they stayed present through discomfort instead of disappearing. Be honest here. Count only the actual actions, not the potential you see in them, not the person you know they could be, not the efforts you imagine they are making internally, just the observable, concrete, sustained actions they have taken to build this relationship. Look at that ledger. The imbalance will be stark. This is not about blame. This is about recognizing that you are maintaining a bond almost entirely through your own effort, and that effort is draining you of the energy you need to build a life that actually nourishes you. The bond is not an asset. It is a liability. And recognizing that truth is the first critical step toward severing it. But recognition alone is not enough. Knowing you should leave and actually being able to leave are two entirely different things. This is where the second stage becomes essential. I call this the implementation of radical self-reciprocity. This stage is about redirecting all the energy you have been pouring into them back toward yourself. Every impulse to text them, to check their social media, to analyze their last communication, to figure out what they are thinking, to plan your next interaction. Every single one of those impulses must be intercepted and consciously rerouted into self-focused action. This is the hardest stage because it requires sustained daily effort at precisely the moment when you feel most depleted. But this is also where the real transformation happens. You have been using the avoidant as your external emotional regulator. When they are close, you feel okay. When they pull away, you spiral. Your emotional state has become entirely dependent on their behavior, which you cannot control. Radical self-reciprocity is about building an internal regulation system that functions independent of their presence or absence. Here is what this looks like in practice. Let's say you are hit with the overwhelming urge to reach out to them. You want to text, to call, to create some reason for contact. Your nervous system is screaming at you to close the gap, to re-establish connection, to ease the anxiety of their distance. In the old pattern, you would have acted on that urge immediately. But now you pause. You acknowledge the urge without judgment. You say to yourself, I am feeling the need to connect because that is my familiar pattern, but I am choosing a different response. Then you take the energy you would have spent on that text message and you redirect it. If you would have spent 20 minutes crafting the perfect message and then another 40 minutes anxiously waiting for a response and analyzing that response when it came, that is an hour of focused energy. You take that hour and you invest it in yourself. You go for a run. You call a friend who actually reciprocates your care. You work on a project that matters to you. You read a book. You cook yourself a genuinely good meal. You do anything that actively demonstrates to yourself that your energy has value and deserves to be invested in sources that actually nourish you rather than deplete you. This sounds simple, but it is revolutionary. You are retraining your nervous system to find regulation through self-care rather than through external validation. You are proving to yourself, through repeated action, that you can feel calm, centered, and okay, even when the avoidant is distant. You are building evidence that contradicts the story your nervous system has been telling you, the story that says you need them to be okay. This stage also requires what I call boundary integrity, and this is where most people falter. Because the moment you start to pull back, the moment you stop chasing, the avoidant will almost certainly respond. This is predictable. They will sense the shift in the dynamic. They will feel the space you are creating. And because that space threatens their comfortable position of being pursued without having to commit, they will make a move to close the gap. They will suddenly show more interest. They will text more frequently. They will suggest plans. They might even have a vulnerable conversation or make promises about changing. This is the most dangerous moment in the entire process of breaking the bond. Because this is exactly what you have been waiting for. This feels like validation. This feels like proof that if you just hold out a little longer, they will finally become the person you need them to be. But here is what you must understand. This is not change. This is the dynamic reasserting itself. They are not showing up because they have transformed. They are showing up because you stopped chasing. And that shift in the familiar pattern triggered their own anxiety. They are reacting to the loss of the comfortable dynamic, not committing to a new one. Boundary integrity means you evaluate their actions based on sustained behavioral change, not on temporary surges of attention or vague promises about the future. If they say, I am ready to talk about our future, or I have been thinking about going to therapy, or I realize now what I have been doing wrong, your response cannot be based on hope. It must be based on evidence. You say, either to yourself or to them, I am glad you are having these realizations. When you have taken concrete, sustained action to address these patterns, we can revisit this conversation. But words without action are not enough anymore. This is not cruelty. This is self-preservation. Because if you re-engage based on their words rather than their demonstrated change, you will find yourself right back in the cycle. They will feel secure again once you stop pulling away, and their discomfort will ease, and they will return to their avoidant pattern, and you will have lost all the progress you made. Boundary integrity means you protect the ground you have gained. You do not give it back for free. The third and final stage is the integration of the new narrative. Up until now, whether you consciously realized it or not, you have been operating from a narrative that says, I am worthy of love if I can get the avoidant to commit. Your self-worth has been entangled with the outcome of this relationship. Every time they pulled away, it felt like evidence that you were not enough. Every time you failed to get them to stay close, it felt like personal failure. This narrative is what made the bond so difficult to break, because leaving felt like admitting defeat, like confirming that you were not worthy after all. The new narrative you must integrate is this: I have inherent worth that exists completely independent of whether any particular person recognizes it. I will choose relationships that actively reflect my worth rather than relationships that require me to prove it. This is not just a mental shift. This is a complete reorientation of how you approach connection. Your worth is no longer the goal you are trying to achieve through the relationship. Your worth is the filter through which you evaluate whether the relationship deserves your continued investment. This means that any dynamic requiring you to chase, to sacrifice your peace, to diminish your needs, to accept inconsistency, to beg for basic reciprocity, is immediately and decisively filtered out. Not because the other person is bad, but because the dynamic does not match your worth. You are no longer trying to earn a place in someone's life. You are evaluating whether they have earned a place in yours. Integrating this narrative requires practice, especially in moments when the old anxiety surfaces. You will have moments where you feel the pull of the old bond, where you question whether you made the right choice, where you wonder if you should have tried harder. When those moments come, and they will come, you use what I call emotional fact-checking. You pause and you separate the feeling from the reality. You ask yourself, is this feeling based on current evidence, or is this an echo of the old pattern? The old pattern trained you to interpret their distance as rejection, as evidence of your inadequacy. But the reality is that their distance is simply their avoidant pattern, playing out exactly as it always has. It has nothing to do with your worth. When you feel that surge of old anxiety, you fact-check it. You remind yourself that their behavior is consistent with their attachment style, not with your value. You acknowledge the feeling without letting it dictate your action. You say, I feel anxious because this is familiar, but I know the truth. My worth is not determined by their capacity for connection. Over time, with repeated fact-checking, the new narrative becomes automatic. You stop interpreting their distance as a statement about you. You start seeing it clearly for what it is: their limitation, their pattern, their struggle. And once you see it that way, the bond loses its power. Because the bond was never really about them. It was about the story you told yourself about what their rejection meant. When that story changes, when your worth is no longer on trial, the bond simply dissolves. Let me address something that almost everyone experiences during this process, but rarely talks about: the guilt. When you start to pull back, when you implement boundaries, when you redirect your energy away from the avoidant and toward yourself, you will likely feel guilty. You will feel like you are abandoning them. You will feel like you are being selfish. You will feel like if you were just more patient, more understanding, more compassionate, they could heal and the relationship could work. This guilt is a trap. It is the final defense mechanism of the old dynamic. Because if you feel too guilty to leave, you will stay, and the pattern will continue. So let me be clear about something. Choosing your own well-being over someone else's comfort is not selfish. It is necessary. You are not responsible for fixing their avoidant attachment. You are not responsible for staying in a dynamic that hurts you just because leaving might hurt them. You are not responsible for sacrificing your peace to maintain their sense of security. Compassion does not require self-abandonment. You can have empathy for their struggles while still maintaining the boundary that you deserve reciprocal care. You can wish them well while acknowledging that you cannot be the person who helps them heal, especially when the cost of trying is your own emotional health. Radical self-reciprocity means you give yourself the same compassion, the same patience, the same understanding that you have been so freely giving to them. There is one more element that needs to be addressed, and that is the non-linear nature of healing. You will not move through these 3 stages in a neat, orderly progression. You will have days where you feel strong and clear and certain that you made the right choice. And then you will have days where you feel weak and confused and convinced that you made a terrible mistake. This is normal. This is not failure. This is simply how healing works when you are breaking a bond that was deeply entrenched in your nervous system. On the difficult days, when the pull of the old bond feels overwhelming, when you are tempted to reach out, when you start romanticizing the relationship and forgetting why you left, use the compassionate observer technique. Step back from the intensity of the emotion and observe it without judgment. Do not berate yourself for feeling it. Do not panic that feeling. It means you are backsliding. Simply notice it. Say to yourself, I am experiencing the urge to reconnect because that is the pattern my nervous system knows, but I am consciously choosing a different path, a path that prioritizes my peace. This technique allows you to acknowledge the pain without letting it control your actions. You become the aware observer of your emotional experience rather than the helpless victim of it. You create space between the feeling and the action, and in that space, you reclaim your power to choose. The feeling will pass, the urge will fade, and each time you observe it without acting on it, you weaken the old neural pathway and strengthen the new one. Breaking the bond with an avoidant is not about winning a battle against them. It is not about proving they were wrong or making them realize what they lost. It is about winning the war for your own emotional freedom. The bond is truly broken not when they disappear from your life, but when their presence or absence no longer has the power to determine your emotional state. When you can see a text from them and feel neutral rather than anxious. When you can hear about them through mutual friends and feel genuinely indifferent. When you can remember the relationship and feel gratitude for what you learned rather than pain for what you lost. Your self-worth is preserved and actually amplified when you make the choice to exit a dynamic that demanded constant sacrifice and enter a life defined by radical self-reciprocity and unwavering boundary integrity. This is the ultimate act of self-love. Not the easy self-love of bubble baths and affirmations, but the fierce self-love that says, I will not participate in my own diminishment, even when leaving is the harder choice. You are not breaking a bond with them. You are breaking the bond with the version of yourself that believed your worth was conditional, that believed love required self-sacrifice, that believed you had to earn what should have been freely given. And in breaking that old bond, you are forming a new one. A bond with your authentic self, with your inherent worth, with your right to be loved in a way that does not require you to shrink or chase or beg. This new bond is unbreakable. This new bond is where your true power lives. And this bond, unlike the one you are leaving behind, will never ask you to choose between connection and your own well-being. This is the freedom you have been searching for. This is the victory that actually matters. If you recognize yourself in this pattern, take a moment to reflect before reacting. Ask yourself honestly, am I staying because this relationship nourishes me? Or am I staying because leaving feels like admitting failure? That distinction changes everything. The bond with an avoidant is not love. It is a pattern that feeds on your hope while draining your peace. Breaking it is not giving up. It is finally choosing yourself. Leave a comment sharing where you are in this process. Are you in the recognition stage, seeing the true cost for the first time? Are you implementing radical self-reciprocity and redirecting your energy back to yourself? Have you integrated the new narrative and reclaimed your worth? Your perspective helps others see they are not alone in this struggle. If this gave you clarity on how to break the bond without breaking yourself, hit the like button and subscribe for more content on reclaiming your emotional freedom in relationships. Thanks for watching.